Hey guys, so today I'm going to be recommending you some of my favourite spooky reads. We're getting closer to Halloween and it just puts me in the mood for really creepy books, so I thought I'd share some of them with you guys. This is kind of a variety. There's going to be some mystery thrillers, some books that just have a creepy kind of ambiance, some more like horror type books, and just a bit of everything. So the first book that I'm going to recommend to you is With Malice by Eileen Cook. This one is a YA mystery thriller. It's about a girl who goes overseas to Italy. It's for some kind of like educational thing, I can't remember why, but she goes and her best friend goes as well. But then one day she wakes up in hospital and finds out that her best friend is dead, and there's a criminal investigation going on to try and find out what happened and how did her friend die. And you're pretty much in the shoes of the girl that's in hospital. You don't know what's happened. She can't remember anything that happened, and it's a really fantastic book. It had me really hooked in the whole way, and it also deals with like how the media deals with events like this and how they kind of like try and push blame before there's even been like a trial or anything like that. So found this book really interesting. I would highly recommend it. The second book I'm going to recommend you guys is one that's quite similar to With Malice, but I liked this one slightly more. It was really good, and it is Dangerous Girls by Abigail Haas. This is another YA mystery thriller, and it's about a group of friends that travel to Europe. I can't remember exactly where in Europe, but they go to Europe for a holiday. One of the girls gets murdered, and they all come under scrutiny as the murder is being investigated. I think mostly because the local like law enforcement would rather it be one of these like foreign tourists rather than one of, you know, a local from their own community. It dealt with the like trial and everything as well, which was really interesting. I also just found it really creepy, and like the ending was really unexpected for me, so I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was so good. The next recommendation I have for you is a little bit of a different one because it is a play, and that is Macbeth by William Shakespeare. I've just read this one recently and it was so good. I feel like a lot of you guys are probably familiar with the story of Macbeth, but in case you're not, essentially he meets three witches who tell him that he's going to be king one day, so he decides to kill the current king. And I think because of the witches, they do the whole like double boil and trouble thing that's really famous. That's really creepy. And also just the fact that Macbeth murders someone, it then deals with like the psychological aftermath that happens after that. Lady Macbeth, who's his wife, deals with the same kind of feelings of like guilt and trauma and things like that. I just found it really interesting because it's so dark and creepy and horrible. It's a really good play. The next book is one that is also kind of a little bit different because it's non-fiction. It's essentially a true crime novel, and that is In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. This one was written in 1959, and it's based on the true story of a family that was murdered in their farmhouse. And this book follows the two guys that committed the murder. It follows kind of their lead up to that point, so like why they decided to do it and what led them to it, and then also what were their actions afterwards. If you like those true crime kind of stories, I think you'll really like this one. It's really well written. It reads definitely more like a novel than non-fiction. So if you like true crime podcasts and things like that, I'm obsessed with Case File, for example. You will really enjoy this book. The next one is for all of you guys that love zombie and apocalyptic kind of movies or books. This one is Wake by Elizabeth Knox, who is a New Zealand author that I love. She writes really fantastic books. This one follows a policewoman who gets called to a incident of some kind of violence in a small town in New Zealand. She arrives there and realizes that everyone in this town has basically turned it into zombies and they're trying to attack each other and things, and she ends up trapped in this small town because for some reason as well none of them can now leave. She's trying to find other survivors who weren't affected by whatever this zombie thing is. They're trying to figure out what happened, like why this has happened, why they're trapped there as well, and just essentially trying to survive and do the best that they can. This book was so interesting. It covers quite an extensive period of time, so you really get to know all of the characters and how their backgrounds affect how they deal with this situation and things. I found it so interesting, and It was really gory in places as well, like just a warning, if you like that you'll love this book. But yeah, it was really fantastic. The next recommendation I have for you is a classic, and that is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I would say this book kind of has like gothic sort of tones to it. It was written in I think the 20s or the 30s, and it's about a woman that meets a man while she's kind of like on holiday or something, and he proposes and they end up getting married, but this woman, his new wife, has a hard time filling in the shoes of his previous wife who has passed away. Her name was Rebecca, and this new wife feels like all of the staff and everyone at their house still really love Rebecca and would prefer that Rebecca was there, and she just feels kind of like haunted by the spirit of Rebecca. It has a big twist in it as well. I loved this book. The next recommendation is one that also has a really creepy atmosphere to it, and that is Spellbook of the Lost and Found by Moira Fowley-Doyle. It's about a group of teens that live in a small town, and one night things in their lives start disappearing. They wake up like after a party, and there's a whole bunch of things that have gone missing. They end up finding a really mysterious spell book, and they're pretty much trying to piece together everything that's happening. You also have a parallel storyline from another group of friends, and you kind of have to try and work out like how do these fit together. It's a very mysterious book. I definitely didn't like guess what was going on or anything like that, but my favorite thing about it was just the really spooky atmosphere. You could just get all these creepy feelings reading it, so I really enjoyed this book. My next recommendation is You by Carolyn Kepnes. It's an adult thriller. It's essentially told from the point of view of a guy that is stalking a woman, so in itself that is really interesting because you don't usually see things from the antagonist's point of view in a like thriller type of novel, so that was really interesting. It's written kind of in second person as well. It's written as if it's written to the woman that he is stalking, and it follows a really long period of time. He basically by chance meets this woman. He works in a bookstore and she comes in one day and he kind of decides that she's perfect for him and they should be together, so he uses social media and things like that to try and integrate himself into her life. So she thinks that everything that happens is kind of by chance. He's actually planned the whole thing and like wriggled himself into her life, and he starts messing with people that she knows. It's really creepy, and just even more creepy because it's told from his perspective, so definitely recommend this one. It's becoming a series as well, I believe, so yeah, definitely read the book before that series comes out because it's going to make such a great show. Next I have another classic to recommend you, and this is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I feel like this is one that a lot of people have read, but if you haven't, I'll tell you a little bit about what it's about. There's a young guy called Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray gets his picture, like his portrait, painted, and he is just overcome with how handsome he looks in this portrait, and he thinks to himself, wow, I would sell my soul to remain looking as beautiful as I look in this portrait forever and like not age and things like that. So that's kind of what happens. So there are some really shocking moments in this book. The prose, the writing is really beautiful as well. Oscar Wilde is a fantastic writer, but it also has that really creepy gothic feeling to it as well, with the portrait and with Dorian Gray willing to sell his soul. It's creepy and awesome. The 10th book that I'm going to recommend to you guys is actually called 10. This one is by Gretchen McNeil, and it is a very like typical teen slasher type book. If you've watched any of those like teen horror movies where there's a bunch of kids from high school and like some of them end up getting killed and you're trying to figure out which one of them is doing it, this is essentially like a novelized version of those type of movies, and I really enjoyed it. So there's a bunch of kids that go for like a weekend or something to an island, so they're quite isolated, and people start getting murdered and they're trying to figure out who's doing it, who has some kind of like secret, or who wants revenge on who and stuff like that. It's a really good slightly like trashy kind of slasher novel. I really enjoyed it. The final book that I'm going to recommend to you guys is actually by a bunch of different authors, and this is a short story anthology called Slasher Girls and Monster Boys. This one overall I only rated it 3 stars, and like all of the other books that I've mentioned were 4 or 5 stars, like really high ratings for me. This one was a bit lower just because I don't love all of the stories in it, but it's still, I would say, definitely worth picking up to read most of the stories in this book. Like, most of them are great, and there were two in particular that I thought were fantastic. There's one that's based on Alice in Wonderland, which if you're an Alice in Wonderland fan, I feel like you will love this story. It was so creepy. I would read this story over and over again. Like, I haven't bought this book yet, but I'm going to, just because that story was top notch. Like, I would happily read that over and over and over. The other story that I loved, which is also fantastic and definitely worth checking out this collection for, I can't remember what it was called, but it's the one by J. Kristoff. His story was fantastic. It kind of reminded me of like Psycho, you know, the one with Norman Bates, that film, but also Catfish, the TV show. Like, there's so much to that story, and there were so many twists. The first twist that happened, I was satisfied. I was like, wow, I didn't see that coming, and I thought that was going to be the end. But there are like several other twists after that that just made it like better and better each time, and it was crazy. Fantastic story. So overall, definitely recommend this collection for Halloween. It was so good. So those are all of my spooky book recommendations leading into fall. For some of you guys, it's spring here in New Zealand, but hey, I'm still in the mood for really creepy books. If you have any favorites, whether they're mystery thrillers, just creepy atmospheric type books, or witchy books, or whatever your jam is for Halloween, let me know your favorites in the comments down below, because I'm going to be trying to pick up as many spooky, creepy thriller books as I can in the month of October. So definitely recommend me some as well, and I will be checking them out. So thank you guys for watching this. If you want to keep up with what I'm reading all the time, you can friend me on Goodreads and follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and I will see you guys with another video in a couple of days. Bye.